All right, hello, Scott here. Now, have you ever wondered why do the dirtiest secrets in politics rarely make it into the history books? You know, the really juicy stuff, the kind of back alley deals and ethically, let's call them maneuvers that would make a Machiavellian ferret blush. It's a fair question, isn't it? Because history, as it's often presented, can feel a bit like a meticulously edited reality show. All the dramatic confrontations are there, but the truly scandalous bits, the ones filmed in the producer's office with a hidden camera, somehow never make the final cut. It's less warts and all and more all airbrushed all the time, with a complimentary soundtrack of patriotic eagles soaring. The truth is, the narratives we're fed are often as carefully constructed as a billionaire's alibi for being on a private island during a crucial Senate vote. They're polished, they're palatable, and they usually paint a picture that's suspiciously flattering to whoever was holding the biggest paintbrush, or more accurately, the largest pile of money and influence at the time. And that, my friends, is precisely the problem. Because what's left out is often more telling than what's put in. It's like a family photo where Uncle Barry, the one with the interesting hobbies and the ankle monitor, has been conspicuously photoshopped out, replaced by a slightly too enthusiastic golden retriever. So tonight, or today, or whenever you're consuming this digital missive, and let's be honest, it's probably 3 a.m. and you've fallen down a YouTube rabbit hole, no judgment. We're going to dive headfirst into the murky waters of historical omissions. Yes, you and I, intrepid explorers of the deliberately obscured. Let's break down the real reasons the shadiest deals stay in the shadows, why the official story often resembles a poorly written fantasy novel, and what they don't want you to know. Grab your metaphorical snorkels, because it's about to get deep and frankly a little bit smelly. Right, let's kick off with the oldest trick in the, book, The Winners Write the History. It's a cliche, I know, but like many cliches, such as politicians are trustworthy or this internet connection will remain stable for my entire video call, it's a cliche because it's depressingly, infuriatingly true. Think about it. Who's got the resources, the motivation, and frankly the sheer gall to commission those enormous leather-bound tomes that end up in libraries, gathering dust, and the occasional silverfish? It's not typically the folks who ended up on the pointy end of a revolution, is it? No, it's the victors, the conquerors, the chaps who successfully managed to convince everyone that their particular brand of organized land grabbing was, in fact, manifest destiny or civilizing the natives. They're the ones with the fancy quills and the access to the printing presses, or in modern terms, the media conglomerates, and the surprisingly compliant social media algorithms. They get to frame the narrative, to decide who the heroes are, who the villains are, and who gets conveniently written out as collateral damage or, even better, miscellaneous background peasant number 3. And this isn't just about grand sweeping narratives of empires rising and falling. Oh no, it happens on a smaller, more insidious scale too. Consider your average school textbook. It's often a masterpiece of selective storytelling, isn't it? Big, bold chapters on glorious victories, national triumphs, and the unquestionable genius of founding fathers who, if you read their diaries, were often just as petty and prone to terrible fashion choices as the rest of us. But the awkward bits, the massacres, the betrayals, the policies that now look about as enlightened as a lead-based sippy cup, those tend to get a brief mumbled paragraph if they're lucky. It's like your country's history is a dating profile. You highlight the charming anecdotes, the philanthropic work, the time you bravely rescued a kitten from a moderately low branch. You conveniently omit the part where you bankrupted 3 small businesses, have a restraining order from a petting zoo, and once tried to pay for a pizza with exposure. The winners get to curate their global dating profile, and surprise, surprise, they always come off looking like absolute catches, ready to bring democracy and stability to your doorstep, whether you ordered it or not. The power to control the narrative is immense because it shapes not just how we see the past, but how we understand the present. If you're consistently told that your nation's history is an unbroken chain of noble intentions and heroic deeds, you're less likely to question its current actions. It's a form of societal gaslighting where the inconvenient truths are dismissed as isolated incidents or the unfortunate byproduct of a different time, as if morality has an expiration date like a carton of questionable milk. And monuments. Oh, let's talk about monuments, those giant bronze statues of stern-faced men on horses, often looking like they've just remembered they left the stove on. Who commissions those? Again, it's the winners, or at least their ideological descendants, cementing their version of history in several tons of metal, daring future generations to question the narrative. It's a very permanent, very public way of saying this is what mattered. These are the people we celebrate, everyone else less so. The deliberate omission of inconvenient truths is a cornerstone of this process. It's not always about outright lying, though there's plenty of that too. Sometimes it's about subtle shifts in emphasis, careful choices of language. Were they brave explorers or heavily armed invaders with a poor sense of direction? Were they pacifying the region or brutally suppressing dissent? The words matter, and the winners choose the words that make them sound like they weren't, colossal assholes. This shaping of history has a profound impact on national identity. We build our sense of who we are based on these shared stories. If those stories are incomplete or deliberately skewed, then our understanding of ourselves is fundamentally flawed. It's like building a magnificent skyscraper on a foundation of Jenga blocks and wishful thinking. Sooner or later, things are going to get wobbly, and someone's going to ask why there's a statue of a guy who owned other human beings in the town square. Challenging these established narratives is incredibly difficult. It's like trying to tell your grandma that her prize-winning apple pie recipe actually tastes a bit like regret and old socks. People are invested in these stories. They're comfortable. They form part of their identity. To question them is to question something fundamental, and that's often met with resistance, defensiveness, or a polite suggestion that perhaps you should focus on the positive. And let's not forget who controls the archives. The actual physical documents, the letters, the memos, the records. For a long time, access to these was heavily restricted, controlled by governments and institutions with a vested interest in maintaining a particular version of events. If the evidence that contradicts the official story is locked away in a dusty basement labeled miscellaneous, do not open until the heat death of the universe, then it's pretty hard for dissenting voices to make their case. Think of figures like Christopher Columbus, for centuries celebrated as the brave discoverer of America, a narrative that conveniently skipped over the whole genocide and enslavement of indigenous populations part. It took decades, centuries even, of painstaking work by historians, often from marginalized communities, to begin to correct that narrative, to say actually there were people here already, and what followed wasn't exactly a friendly exchange of artisanal bread recipes. The winners had written a very compelling, albeit deeply flawed, first draft. The motivation behind all this narrative control is at its core about maintaining power and legitimacy. If your regime, your system, your nation's founding is built on a foundation of unimpeachable virtue, then your current authority is harder to challenge. It's a way of saying, we've always been the good guys, so trust us, we know what we're doing, even when they're demonstrably setting fire to the global kitchen, while simultaneously denying the existence of flames. The long-term consequences of these historical blind spots are significant. They allow cycles of injustice to repeat because we fail to learn from the mistakes of the past, not the sanitized Hallmark Channel version. If you don't acknowledge the problematic bits, you're doomed to find yourself wondering why history seems to be stuck on a particularly unpleasant repeat cycle, like a terrible song you can't get out of your head, except the song is systemic inequality. And so the pen, or more accurately the state-sanctioned historical commission, remains mightier than the sword, especially when it comes to erasing the sword's less savory achievements. Now, if the winners are busy curating the official story like it's their Instagram feed, there's another equally potent reason why the truly grimy details of politics stay hidden. Secrecy by design. Yes, that's right. A lot of the really consequential stuff, the decisions that shape our lives, the deals that make or break nations, they don't happen under the glare of C-SPAN cameras or in meticulously transcribed public forums. Oh no, that would be far too transparent. And transparency, as any politician with a skeleton-filled closet will tell you, is terribly overrated, much like kale. Instead, real power often moves like a ninja in a particularly dark room, silently, unseen, and with a disconcerting habit of leaving a trail of bewildered historians asking, "Wait, what just happened there?" These critical maneuvers take place behind closed doors, in hushed conversations in dimly lit corridors, over expensive lunches where the only thing on the record is the wine pairing, and in untraceable, deniable, if you repeat this, I'll say, you're hallucinating agreements. It's governance by nudge, wink, and a firm handshake in a room with no recording devices. Think about it. How many truly game-changing political decisions have been announced with a full, unredacted transcript of every single conversation that led up to them? Approximately zero. What we get is the polished press release, the carefully worded statement, the triumphant photo op. We don't see the frantic horse trading, the threats, the promises of future favors, the desperate compromises made at 3 a.m. when everyone's fueled by stale coffee and existential dread. That's the messy sausage-making process they'd rather you didn't inspect too closely. These off-the-record conversations are the lifeblood of a certain kind of politics. It's where the negotiations happen, far from public scrutiny or the prying eyes of journalists who haven't yet been co-opted or bought a lovely new summer house. This is just between us, they'll say, or if this gets out, we're all sunk. It's a system built on plausible deniability, where nothing is truly confirmed until it's strategically leaked by someone who wants it confirmed but doesn't want their fingerprints on the leak. It's a masterclass in political shadow puppetry. And then there are the private meetings, the informal chats between powerful leaders, the working dinners at exclusive clubs, the golf games that somehow result in major policy shifts. What's discussed? Who agreed to what? Often, the official record is thinner than a supermodel's alibi. You might get a vague communique about frank and productive discussions, which is political code for we yelled at each other for 3 hours and barely agreed on the appetizers. The actual substance remains tantalizingly out of reach for historians. Untraceable deals are another key component. Think of back channels, unofficial envoys, verbal agreements that are never committed to paper. How do you document a promise made in a Swiss chalet between a corporate lobbyist and a finance minister, especially when both parties have a vested interest in that promise remaining as ethereal as a politician's campaign pledge the day after an election? You can't. It's designed to be untraceable, like a fart in a hurricane. This creates a massive headache for anyone trying to piece together what happened. Historians are often left sifting through declassified documents that have been redacted with all the subtlety of a toddler attacking a coloring book with a black crayon. Key names, dates, and entire paragraphs are blacked out, leaving gaping holes in the narrative. It's like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle where half the pieces are missing and the other half are just pictures of official-looking ink blotches. The result is that official histories often have to rely on speculation, on reading between the heavily censored lines, or on the memoirs of political figures, which are, shall we say, notoriously reliable and unbiased. Yes, because nothing says objective truth like a 700-page book written by someone whose primary goal is to ensure they look like a combination of Winston Churchill, Mother Teresa, and a particularly astute golden retriever. This culture of secrecy isn't accidental. It's a feature, not a bug. It allows those in power to operate with a level of impunity to make decisions that might be wildly unpopular or ethically dubious without having to immediately answer for them. If no one knows exactly what you did or how you did it, it's much harder to hold you accountable. It's the political equivalent of eating the last cookie and then blaming the dog, except the dog is national security or executive privilege. And when scraps of information do emerge years or decades later through declassification or a particularly chatty whistleblower, they often paint a picture vastly different from the one presented at the time. Suddenly, the unavoidable necessity looks more like a colossal, self-serving blunder, and the wise, statesman-like decision reveals itself to be a panicked gamble based on faulty intelligence and a desire to win the next election. Hindsight is 20/20, especially when you finally get the unredacted prescription. The problem for historians is that this deliberate obscurity means that the first draft of history, often written by journalists, is also working with incomplete information. They're trying to report on a play where half the actors are off stage whispering their most important lines. So the initial understanding is flawed, and then the official winner-approved version comes along later to further cement a particular, often self-serving perspective. So while we might imagine history being meticulously recorded by diligent scribes in real time, the reality, especially for the shadier aspects of politics, is more like trying to reconstruct a party you weren't invited to, based on a few blurry photos posted on social media and the vague, contradictory accounts of people who were definitely too drunk to remember anything accurately. It's a challenge, to say the least. Ultimately, this secrecy by design ensures that the real levers of power, the true motivations, and the often unpalatable compromises remain shrouded in a fog of no comment, and that information is classified. It leaves us, the public and future historians, to play a frustrating game of connect the dots, where most of the dots have been deliberately erased or moved to an offshore account. And that, my friends, is how you keep the dirtiest secrets dirty and secret. All right, so we've established that winners love to airbrush their historical portraits and that a lot of political maneuvering happens with the transparency of a brick wall. But what happens when occasionally, just occasionally, the veil is lifted? What happens when those top secret stamps expire or a government, perhaps in a fit of misplaced optimism or under duress, decides to declassify some of its murkier files? Well, that's when things get really interesting. That's when we get to see the alternative archives, the B-sides of history, and boy, do they sometimes tell a different story. A fantastic, or rather fantastically infuriating example of this is the Gulf of Tonkin incident. Now, for those of you whose American history classes were perhaps more focused on the inspiring tale of Johnny Appleseed, a man who, let's be honest, probably had some serious unresolved issues with Apple distribution, the Gulf of Tonkin incident in August 1964 was a pivotal moment. It was presented as an unprovoked attack by North Vietnamese torpedo boats on United States destroyers in international waters. A clear act of aggression. Outrageous. President Lyndon B. Johnson went on national television looking suitably grave and resolute, like a man who had just been informed that his favorite brand of barbecue sauce was being discontinued. He spoke of repeated acts of violence against the armed forces of the United States and the need for a swift, firm response. The media, by and large, reported this as gospel. Patriotic fervor swelled. Remember the Maine? People probably didn't shout, but it was that kind of vibe. Updated for the Cold War era. It was a rallying point. Congress, swept up in this wave of righteous indignation and perhaps a touch of we better look tough on communism, overwhelmingly passed the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. This resolution was crucial. It gave President Johnson broad authority to escalate United States military involvement in Vietnam, essentially a blank check for war, without a formal declaration, and escalate he did. The rest, as they say, is a very long, very tragic, and very well documented chapter of history involving napalm protests and an alarming number of Creedence Clearwater Revival songs. But here's the kicker, the part that didn't make it into the rousing speeches or the initial headlines. Years later, thanks to declassified documents and the work of investigative journalists and historians who presumably drink a lot of coffee, a rather different picture emerged. It turned out the initial unprovoked attack was, shall we say, significantly less clear-cut than presented. There were questions about whether the second alleged attack, the one that really sealed the deal for escalation, even happened at all. Yes, happened at all. Some reports from the United States ships involved spoke of confused sonar readings, jittery sailors, and possibly some over-enthusiastic dolphins. It became increasingly apparent that the evidence for the second attack was, to put it mildly, flimsy. More like wishful thinking attached to a torpedo-shaped weather balloon. Declassified National Security Agency documents eventually revealed internal doubts and admissions that intelligence may have been misinterpreted or even deliberately skewed to support a pre-existing desire for greater military action. Oops. So, what was once presented as a clear-cut case of enemy aggression, a patriotic rallying point that justified sending hundreds of thousands of young Americans into a brutal and protracted conflict, turned out to be built on a foundation of exaggeration, misrepresentation, and quite possibly outright fabrication. The alternative archive, in this case the declassified files, painted a picture not of noble defense, but of a government eager for a pretext to deepen its involvement in a war it was already sliding into. This is the power of those hidden documents, those alternative archives. They can completely reframe our understanding of major historical events. They show us the messy, often cynical calculations that go on behind the scenes, the information that was deliberately withheld from the public and even from many lawmakers at the time. It's like discovering that the heroic knight in the fairy tale actually just tripped over a rock and accidentally impaled the dragon while trying to retrieve his dropped sandwich. The Gulf of Tonkin incident isn't unique in this regard, sadly. History is littered with examples of official narratives crumbling once the classified documents see the light of day. Decisions that seemed logical or unavoidable at the time are revealed to be based on faulty intelligence, political expediency, or the hubris of leaders who believe their own propaganda. It's a sobering reminder that the first story we hear is rarely the whole story, especially when that story is being told by people with a vested interest in looking good. These declassified files are the ghosts at the historical banquet, whispering uncomfortable truths into the ears of the official record. They force us to reevaluate, to question, and to acknowledge that sometimes the good guys were operating with information that was, at best, incomplete and at worst, deliberately manipulated. It's a crucial, if often delayed, corrective to the winner-takes-all approach to history writing. The struggle to get these documents declassified is often a battle in itself. Governments are notoriously reluctant to air their dirty laundry, even decades later. They cite national security, the need to protect sources and methods, or sometimes presumably the risk that the sheer mind-numbing banality of some high-level decision-making processes might cause the public to lose all faith in governance entirely. You mean they decided to invade based on a PowerPoint presentation with too many spinning animations? Dear God. But when these alternative archives do emerge, they are invaluable. They provide the raw material for a more honest, more complete understanding of the past. They allow us to see not just the polished facade of power, but the creaking, often rotten, scaffolding behind it. It's not always pretty, in fact it's rarely pretty, but it's essential if we're to avoid repeating the same mistakes, like a goldfish endlessly surprised by the castle in its bowl. So, the Gulf of Tonkin stands as a stark example, a patriotic rallying point built on shaky ground, later exposed by the very documents that were once used to justify its devastating consequences. It's a testament to the importance of looking beyond the official narrative, of digging into those alternative archives, because that's often where the real, unvarnished, and frequently appalling truth resides, waiting patiently for its subpoena. Okay, so we've seen how winners write the history, how secrecy is basically the official language of backroom deals, and how sometimes, just sometimes, the truth leaks out like a poorly patched submarine. But what happens when the official story is full of holes, when the documents are blacked out like a teenager's diary, and when the explanations offered just don't quite add up? Well, that's when we enter the fascinating, occasionally terrifying, and always entertaining world of conspiracy theories. Now hold on, before you dismiss me as that bloke down the pub who insists the moon landing was faked by Stanley Kubrick on a very convincing soundstage in Nevada, though admittedly the lighting was impeccable, let's be clear. Conspiracy theories are what happen when there's a vacuum of credible information, when the official narrative feels incomplete or worse, deliberately misleading. Human nature abhors a vacuum. And into that vacuum rushes speculation, conjecture, and sometimes ideas that make lizard people control the global cheese supply seem vaguely plausible. The thing is, when dirty politics aren't documented, or when the documentation that does exist is hidden, suppressed, or redacted into oblivion, it's almost a rational response to start looking for alternative explanations. If the government tells you nothing to see here, just a perfectly normal Tuesday, while a squadron of UFOs is doing the Macarena over the White House lawn, you're probably going to start questioning the official Tuesday report. It's human nature to try and connect the dots, even if the dots are invisible or have been deliberately rearranged to spell "trust us." And let's be brutally honest, sometimes the conspiracy theorists have, historically speaking, been onto something. Think about COINTELPRO, the FBI's secret program to discredit and disrupt domestic political organizations. For years, that sounded like paranoid fantasy, until, whoops, documents were leaked and it turned out to be horrifyingly real. Or consider the Tuskegee syphilis study, where the United States Public Health Service deliberately withheld treatment from hundreds of African American men with syphilis for decades just to study the disease's progression. That sounds like a plot from a dystopian novel, but it happened. The official silence or denial in these cases was the conspiracy. So while it's easy to mock the more outlandish theories, the ones involving Elvis working at a chip shop in Blackpool or Bigfoot being a master of disguise and international finance, we need to acknowledge that the soil in which these theories take root is often fertilized by official secrecy and a demonstrable track record of governments, well, lying. It's not always that people are inherently irrational, it's often that they've been given very good reasons to distrust the narrator. The problem arises when this understandable skepticism curdles into an indiscriminate rejection of all official information, or when the desire for an explanation leads people down rabbit holes so deep they eventually emerge convinced that their cat is a CIA informant. Though, to be fair, my cat does stare at me with an unnerving level of judgment. This is where the line between healthy questioning and the earth is flat and controlled by sentient hamsters gets a bit blurry. History, proper evidence-based history, relies on verifiable sources, on cross-referencing, on a rigorous methodology. Conspiracy theories often bypass this, relying instead on suggestive coincidences, anomalous data points taken out of context, and the powerful allure of a narrative that claims to reveal what they don't want you to know. And ironically, that's the title of this very video, so, meta. The difference, I hope, is that we're looking at the reasons for the secrecy, rather than inventing new secrets involving hamsters, unless the hamsters are really, really compelling. When the official historical record is clearly incomplete or manipulated, it creates a space where almost any explanation can seem plausible to someone. If the winners are writing the history, and the backroom deals are deliberately obscured, then the gaps are enormous. And those gaps are tempting targets for anyone with a theory, a YouTube channel, and a strong opinion on the suspicious alignment of ancient monuments with, I don't know, a popular brand of breakfast cereal. The tragedy is that sometimes genuine, legitimate questions about historical events get lumped in with the truly bonkers stuff. If you question the official narrative of a complex event, you risk being labeled a conspiracy theorist, even if your questions are based on documented inconsistencies or newly emerged evidence. It becomes a convenient way to shut down uncomfortable inquiries. Oh, you're one of those. But the tension between official history and conspiracy theory is often a direct result of how much of the political iceberg is deliberately kept submerged. If governments were more transparent, if powerful institutions were more accountable, if the historical record wasn't so often treated like a state secret to be guarded by angry badgers, perhaps there'd be less room for the more outlandish theories to flourish. People wouldn't need to invent explanations if the real ones weren't so frequently hidden behind a paywall of classified stamps. So, the role of conspiracy theories, in a strange way, can sometimes act as a distorted mirror reflecting the inadequacies and opacities of the official historical narrative. They highlight the areas where trust has broken down, where the explanations feel thin, and where the public senses, rightly or wrongly, that they're not being told the whole story. It's a messy, imperfect, and often deeply unhelpful feedback mechanism, but it's a mechanism born out of a desire for truth, however misguided the path to that truth might be. Ultimately, the best antidote to destructive conspiracy theories isn't just ridicule or dismissal. It's a commitment to greater transparency, a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths in our official histories, and an acknowledgement that because we said so is rarely a satisfying answer when the stakes are high and the secrets are deep. Otherwise, we're just leaving the door wide open for the next theory about how pigeons are actually government drones powered by tiny, disgruntled bureaucrats. Actually, that one has potential. So, there you have it, a whirlwind tour through the shadowy corridors of history where the official story is often just the tip of a very large, very deliberately hidden iceberg. We've seen how the victors get to wield the historical paintbrush, how secrecy is practically a job requirement for those in power, and how sometimes, just sometimes, the truth claws its way out of a declassified file blinking in the sunlight, much to the chagrin of those who tried to bury it. And of course, we've touched on what happens when those gaps in the narrative get filled with theories that occasionally involve extraterrestrial zookeepers. The uncomfortable truth is that a vast amount of what really happens, the nitty-gritty of political maneuvering, the ethically gray compromises, the outright dirty deals, much of it will never make it into those leather-bound volumes or the approved curriculum. It's not because it's not important, it's precisely because it's important and often damning that it's kept under wraps. The real history, the one that explains how we truly got to where we are, is often found in the footnotes, in the redacted documents, in the stories that are dismissed or ignored. But here's the crucial takeaway, the thing I really want you to remember long after you've clicked away to watch a video about a cat playing a tiny piano. And again, no judgment, those are delightful. Just because it's not in the history books doesn't mean it didn't happen. If you follow the friction points, the unexplained policy shifts, the moments where things just don't quite add up, and see who benefited, the shadows of those hidden deals start to come into focus. Keep asking questions, keep digging, and never ever take the first draft of history as the final word. Because the truth, as they say, is out there. It's just often very, very well hidden. Thanks for watching.